For years, Heavy D and Diesel Dave were seen as inseparable. Two personalities who built an empire around diesel trucks, extreme builds, and a hit TV show. But behind the scenes, things were never as simple as they looked. Whispers started growing. Tension, distance, and eventually a complete breakdown that no one saw coming. Now, after years of silence, Heavy D is finally speaking out. Join us as we uncover the truth behind Heavy D and Diesel Dave's shocking fallout. The story starts in a place that had nothing to do with television or business plans. It starts with two people meeting by chance in Utah at a church singles event. One was Dave Sparks, later known as Heavy D, someone deeply interested in machines and custom fabrication. The other was Dave Kiley, later known as Diesel Dave, who shared the same passion for diesel engines. They were not there to build a brand. They were just two people who quickly realized they cared about the same things. What made the connection stand out was how natural it felt. In a world currently obsessed with curated online personas on TikTok and Instagram Reels, these two didn't need time to figure each other out. They both liked working on diesel trucks and pushing machines beyond normal limits. That shared interest became the starting point of everything. They were not thinking about business at first. They were simply excited to build, test, and experiment. After meeting, the two Daves began spending more time together, eventually working out of a small garage in Woods Cross, Utah. This was not a polished business. It was a basic repair shop with limited tools and no outside funding. There were no investors, sponsors, or media attention. It was just a place where they could work on trucks and try new ideas. In those early days, the focus was on learning by doing. They built and modified diesel trucks, often trying things that were not standard. Some builds succeeded, others failed, but every project helped them understand how far they could push performance. At this stage, there was no intention of becoming public figures. The work was private, practical, and driven by curiosity. Over time, they started recording some of their projects. At first, it was not meant for an audience. The videos were simple and unplanned, showing what they were working on in the garage. When they began uploading these clips to YouTube, something unexpected happened. People started watching. The content stood out because it was different from normal automotive videos. The builds were extreme, the modifications unusual, and the results often surprised viewers. Videos featuring loud engine modifications and heavy diesel performance started gaining attention. Content that showed rolling coal, where trucks produce thick black exhaust under acceleration, became especially viral. As the audience grew, so did the attention around their work. They were no longer just two mechanics in a garage. They were becoming known names in the online truck space. This growing attention eventually reached larger media companies. The Discovery Channel took interest in their builds and personalities. That interest led to the creation of Diesel Brothers, a television series that launched in 2016. The show focused on their builds, shop work, and chemistry, bringing their projects to a national audience. Once the show aired, everything scaled quickly. The small garage operation turned into a full production environment. Trucks became bigger, projects more complex, and the audience expanded far beyond what they had experienced online. The brand around Heavy D and Diesel Dave grew into something that required structure, staff, and constant content. But even in the early stages of success, pressure started to build. With more attention came higher expectations. Every build was now part of a public image. Every project had to meet entertainment value and audience demand. The garage was no longer just a workspace. It was becoming a brand that needed to constantly perform. As the show expanded, the shift from simple mechanical work to media-driven production became clear. What began as two friends working on trucks in a small Utah shop was now a national television operation with constant visibility and rising expectations. As the spotlight got brighter, the balance between passion and pressure started to quietly change everything. As the Diesel Brothers brand grew, the attention stopped coming only from fans. It also started coming from groups focused on public health and environmental rules. This is where things began to change seriously, because the same content that helped build their fame started to be used in a legal case. In 2017, a lawsuit was filed by Utah physicians for a healthy environment. This group is made up of medical professionals who focus on air quality. Their concern was about emissions and how diesel modifications might affect air pollution. The main allegation was that certain diesel trucks built or featured in the content had emission systems disabled or altered. These systems are designed to control pollution from diesel engines. According to the claims, some modifications allowed trucks to release higher levels of emissions than federal standards allow. This is where the Federal Clean Air Act became important. The lawsuit argued that the actions being shown were in conflict with these rules. A key part of the controversy was the practice of rolling coal. While some see it as a style or performance choice, regulators and environmental groups view it as harmful because it increases pollution and bypasses emissions controls. What made this case different was how public the activity had become. The Diesel Brothers show was filmed, edited, and broadcast to a national audience. That meant the builds and modifications were documented in detail. When the lawsuit moved forward, this public footage became part of the evidence reviewed in court. Content produced for entertainment was now being examined in a legal setting. Scenes that showed truck modifications and visible emissions were analyzed for compliance with environmental law. In 2018, a federal court issued an injunction placing restrictions on certain types of modifications. Even after the injunction, operations continued in some form, leading to further legal attention and disputes over compliance. What developed was a disconnect between two ways of viewing the same content. The show framed the builds as entertainment and creativity. Regulators viewed the same action through the lens of environmental law. This difference created ongoing tension. It was no longer just about building trucks. Every modification could be examined for regulatory compliance. That change marked a major turning point. As the legal situation developed, it stopped being a single lawsuit. It turned into a series of financial pressures that kept stacking. Court records summarized several key payments tied to the case. These included approximately $761,000 paid to the federal government and around $90,000 in penalties at the county level. On top of those penalties, there were significant legal fees. Reports reference roughly $928,000 in payments made to cover the plaintiff's legal costs. The financial impact was not only about fines, but also about covering the legal process on the opposing side. As the case moved through appeals, the court's language became more serious. The conduct was described as flagrant misconduct, signaling that the court viewed the actions as more than minor violations. At the same time, early damages sought reached as high as approximately $114 million. That number was later reduced, but it set the tone for how serious the case was. What made the situation more complex was that this was not the only legal pressure. While the Clean Air Act case was ongoing, trademark litigation involving the use of the diesel name in diesel power gear merchandise emerged. This dispute added a different type of financial exposure. It was about intellectual property and commercial identity. The case argued that the use of the diesel name created confusion with an established fashion brand. In 2023, the court found liability for trademark infringement. Diesel SBA had initially sought around $59 million in damages. The court ultimately set damages at approximately $11.8 million. Even though reduced, it was still a major financial penalty. When these different legal issues are viewed together, a pattern forms. Environmental penalties, legal fees, and trademark disputes were all contributing to the financial pressure. When combined, total exposure was referenced in the range of roughly $13 million across different cases. The brand was now facing overlapping responsibilities that made the situation impossible to manage. As the financial pressure became a vice, the situation moved into a very public stage of liquidation. This is where the focus shifted away from court rulings and into actions involving the trucks. One of the most gut-wrenching moments was a public announcement about large-scale asset liquidation. This included custom-built trucks and shop equipment, many of which were one-of-a-kind builds featured on the show. From the outside, this can look like a normal business pivot. However, behind the scenes, these sales took place with legal judgments already in place. Assets that once represented the identity of the brand were now being converted into cash. On the surface, messaging could still be framed as restructuring. But in legal terms, there were concerns about hiding assets. Court involvement became more active in overseeing asset movement. Monitors were put in place to ensure sales aligned with financial rulings. The focus moved away from production and toward financial management, collapsing the creative engine that drove the partnership. On October 7, 2025, the situation reached a turning point that shifted everything from financial pressure into physical action. According to reports, the arrival of the U.S. Marshal Service in Salt Lake City marked the moment where court rulings stopped being paperwork. At the center of the event was Dave Sparks, known publicly as Heavy D. He was taken into custody in connection with contempt of court related to unpaid obligations reported to be around $843,000. The arrest immediately shattered the day-to-day reality of the business. Projects that were in progress were either paused or killed entirely. The public narrative began to unravel. Prior announcements that had been presented with confidence were now reinterpreted as desperate attempts to stall the inevitable. What once looked like a business transition suddenly appeared connected to unresolved criminal contempt. Another major impact was the shutdown of the usual public-facing rhythm of the brand. After the arrest, the pattern stopped functioning. Public updates became limited, and the usual flow of content slowed to a trickle. Around the same time, Diesel Dave stepped out of direct public communication. There were no joint appearances or supportive posts, a silence that spoke volumes. Their partnership had been a central part of the brand. After the enforcement event, that collaborative presence effectively died. With one partner in custody and the other silent, the structure that supported the brand's visibility began to break down. This was not a planned transition. It was a rapid destruction driven by legal enforcement. The connection that once defined everything now exists in a very different form. Today, their paths no longer look the same. One is focused on rebuilding in a new direction, while the other continues to carry the Diesel performance identity forward in public events and live shows. The gap between them is a chasm carved by resentment, federal pressure, and the realization that the empire they built together is what ultimately drove them apart. If you've been following this journey, make sure to like, subscribe, and stay tuned for more deep dives like this one.